I think sometimes people are talking more about animal welfare. They would like to see animals not abused. They would like to see animals, starving on the street or having almost no medical care. And of course, cruelty toward animals is very prevalent in a society where you have dogs wandering around that are poorly fed, poorly, they have bad skin conditions. So it gets to the point where they look kind of scary and then people don't want to have anything to do with them. And of course,
Mm,
there's the prevalence of rabies, and it seems to be increasing in some areas here. And so
mm,
people are afraid of animals and they don't want to, the dogs, and they don't want to get bitten. And, so it's kind of a self perpetuating
mhm.
cycle where people don't want to help the animals because they're afraid of them, and they're afraid of them because they're not getting help and they're not, well taken care of.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just my anecdote to this is that I grew up in South India and I grew up with dogs. And to your earlier point that, the othering doesn't happen to animals, or at least the anthropocentric kind of mindset that we have. I feel like to this day, in this is Bangalore and my society that I grew up in, kind of middle class society, and educated folks, all that stuff. But it was like animals were certainly viewed as this kind of not even second class, third class, last kind of in the rung of like human, dignity of life. And I mean, I'm so embarrassed to admit that we adopted dogs and we raised them and things like that. And I mean, we meted out the worst possible treatment towards my dogs, and I'm extremely sad about that. I reflect on that. I ruminate over it. It's sad, and I've committed acts of violence, and this is extremely like embarrassing also to admit because of just this ignorance and just a lack of any kind of enlightened ideas about life in general. Forget animals, but life in general. Not having learned these things in school or even in the family, in society and in family and in culture and so on. It's widespread. I feel like some of these things are just like ignorance is widespread. I mean, I'm guessing you've seen some of that, but what do you make of all of that? Like, how did the West evolve to be the way it is? I feel like the West obviously has progressed quite a bit forward in terms of recognizing these rights, and people have written about this, and we've encoded it into laws and so on. We codified these things, but there's a lot. We got a lot of catching up to do in other parts of the world.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about this today, and actually, there's two things that I think might answer that question, and they're somewhat cultural and somewhat related to the fact that India and Nepal are still sort of developing countries, and there's certain parts of the countries, especially in India, that are very rural. I mean, some of the cities, things are much more developed. And what's interesting, there's been research that's been done to demonstrate that as society gets, wealthier, you tend to have more free time. You tend not to be, I was talking with one of the students today that I met at the Kathmandu University School of Law, and he was telling me that, many people in Nepal are just barely living on the edge. Every day
Hmm.
they're just trying to survive. And so they don't even have the luxury of being able to think about the animals. They're just, we think it's being selfish or being, just inward looking, but in
Ignorant.
fact what it is, yeah, but in fact what it is they're just, you know, they do know that there's dogs around them and some people have pets, but the people that have pets are usually people that are a little more well-to-do. They have the disposable income, they have the time to take care of the dogs. That's why most people are unable or just don't even envision bringing a street dog into their home. I mean, first of all, you don't want to bring a dirty dog that has no medical care. And if you can't afford to take a dog to a veterinarian, a street dog, for example, you're not going to want it to come and live in your house and get on your
Hmm.
bed the way we are used to. But they just don't even have the time during the day. I mean, they wake up early in the morning. They have to drive. I mean, getting from one place to another in the Kathmandu area it's just, incredible. It can take 1 or 2 hours to get across town, and people just spend a lot of time, living and surviving, and I think that's part of the problem
Yeah.
or the difference. And then the other thing, which may be somewhat cultural, is that, both in India and in Nepal, there's, a caste system. And
Mhm.
even though, at least in Nepal, I know that technically it's against the law to, make discriminate the way we also have anti-discriminatory laws. um, it's still in the mindset, and
Mhm.
there's still a lot of, unsaid things